The wind howled like a wounded animal across the frozen wasteland of northern Siberia. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison pressed his face against the cracked window of the abandoned research station, watching the snow whip past in violent spirals. Behind him, his 5-man SEAL team huddled around a makeshift fire, their breath visible in the bitter cold that had seeped through every crack and crevice of their shelter. Radios completely dead. "Sir," Petty Officer Rodriguez reported, tossing the mangled communication device aside. The electronics had frozen solid during their emergency landing 3 days ago, when their transport helicopter went down in the blizzard. "Whatever took out our bird also fried every piece of electronic equipment we had." Morrison nodded grimly. They were supposed to be extracted 48 hours ago, after completing a classified reconnaissance mission along the Russian border. Instead, they found themselves stranded in one of the most hostile environments on Earth, with temperatures dropping to -40 degrees and visibility near zero. The research station they'd stumbled upon was their only salvation from certain death, but it felt more like a frozen tomb with each passing hour. Sergeant First Class Tommy Chen paced nervously by the door, his rifle never leaving his hands. "Something's not right about this place, Lieutenant Commander. I've been through the whole facility twice now. All the equipment is too new, too advanced for a station that's supposedly been abandoned for years. And look at this." He held up a coffee mug that was still warm to the touch. "Someone was here recently. Very recently." The youngest member of their team, Petty Officer 2nd Class Marcus Webb, was examining strange markings on the walls. "These aren't research notes," he said, his voice tight with concern. "These are tactical positions, guard rotations, and what looks like prisoner-holding areas. This isn't a research station at all." Morrison felt his blood run cold, and not from the Siberian wind. He grabbed his weapon and motioned for his men to take defensive positions. "How long do you think we've been under surveillance?" he asked Chen, who had the most experience in counterintelligence operations. Before Chen could answer, a metallic clang echoed from somewhere deep within the facility. All 5 SEALs froze, their training kicking in as they moved into combat formation without a single word being spoken. The sound came again, rhythmic and deliberate, like someone was trying to communicate through the metal pipes that ran throughout the building. "That's Morse code," Webb whispered, his eyes wide with recognition. "Someone's tapping out an SOS signal from below us. There's someone else here and they're in trouble." Morrison made a quick decision that would change everything. Against every instinct screaming at him to maintain their defensive position, he pointed toward a metal grate in the floor that led to what appeared to be a basement level. "Rodriguez, Webb, you stay here and watch R6. Chen, you're with me. We're going down there." As they pried open the frozen grate, Morrison couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. But the desperate Morse code signals continued, growing more urgent with each passing moment. Whatever was happening in the depths of this mysterious facility, innocent lives hung in the balance. The wind outside grew even more violent, as if nature itself was trying to warn them away from whatever horrors lay hidden beneath the Siberian ice. The basement was even colder than the main level, if that was possible. Morrison and Chen descended carefully down rusted metal stairs, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like knives. The Morse code signals had stopped abruptly the moment they opened the grate, replaced by an eerie silence that made both men's skin crawl. The basement was larger than they expected, with concrete walls lined with what appeared to be holding cells. Each cell door hung open, revealing empty spaces that showed signs of recent occupation. Blankets, food containers, and personal belongings were scattered about, as if the occupants had left in a hurry. Chen examined one of the cells and found scratches in the concrete wall, counting marks that suggested someone had been kept here for weeks or even months. "Lieutenant Commander," Chen whispered, pointing his flashlight toward the far end of the basement. "You need to see this." At the end of the corridor was a heavy steel door slightly ajar. Beyond it, they could hear the faint sound of machinery humming and occasional voices speaking in what sounded like Russian. Morrison motioned for Chen to take position on one side of the door, while he approached from the other. Through the crack, they could see a much larger room filled with sophisticated computer equipment and several armed guards. "This is definitely not an abandoned research station," Morrison muttered under his breath. "This is an active military installation, and we just walked right into the middle of it." The voices became clearer as they listened. The guards were discussing patrol schedules and something about the American prisoners in Sector 7. Morrison felt his heart skip a beat. There were other Americans being held somewhere in this facility, and from the sound of it, they weren't expected to survive much longer. Suddenly, Chen grabbed Morrison's arm and pointed back toward the stairs. Through the darkness, they could see flashlight beams moving around the main level above them. Their position had been discovered, and enemy soldiers were now searching the facility. Rodriguez's voice came through their short-range radio in an urgent whisper. "Commander, we've got multiple hostiles entering the building. At least 8 armed men, maybe more. They know we're here, sir. They're conducting a systematic search of every room." Morrison and Chen exchanged a look of grim determination. They were trapped between enemy forces above and below, with American prisoners somewhere in the facility depending on them for rescue. The blizzard outside meant there was no possibility of escape, and their ammunition wouldn't last long in a prolonged firefight. "Chen, can you tell from the equipment in that room what kind of operation this is?" Morrison asked, trying to gather as much intelligence as possible before they were forced into combat. Chen took another careful look through the door crack. "It looks like a communication intercept station, sir. They're probably monitoring military communications across the entire region, but there's something else." He paused, studying the setup more carefully. "Those computers are connected to satellite uplinks. They're not just listening to our communications, they're actively feeding false information back to our command structure." The implications hit Morrison like a physical blow. This wasn't just a listening post or prisoner-holding facility. It was an active espionage operation that had been feeding disinformation to American forces for who knows how long. Every mission in this region, every strategic decision made by their commanders, could have been compromised by the intelligence gathered at this location. The sound of boots on metal stairs echoed from above as the enemy soldiers began their descent into the basement. Morrison and Chen had perhaps 60 seconds before they would be discovered. The American prisoners were still out there somewhere. The enemy was closing in from multiple directions, and the blizzard outside continued to rage with no sign of letting up. Morrison made a split-second decision that would either save his team or get them all killed. Instead of retreating back upstairs into the waiting arms of the search party, he motioned for Chen to follow him deeper into the facility. They slipped through the steel door into the computer room, moving silently past the humming servers and communication equipment. The 3 Russian technicians working at the computer stations never saw them coming. Morrison and Chen subdued them quickly and quietly, using their training to neutralize the threats without raising an alarm. Chen immediately began examining the computer systems while Morrison secured the room and searched for any additional intelligence about the American prisoners. "This is incredible, sir," Chen whispered as he scrolled through files on the main computer terminal. "They've been intercepting and altering our mission orders for over 6 months. That failed operation in Kazakhstan last winter, the compromised safe house in Ukraine, even our current mission here. They knew we were coming before we even left base." Morrison felt sick to his stomach as he realized the scope of the betrayal. Dozens of good soldiers had died because of the intelligence gathered at this facility, but his attention was drawn to a detailed facility map displayed on one of the monitors. The complex was much larger than they had imagined, with 3 underground levels and multiple escape tunnels. More importantly, he could see the location marked as American detention block on the lowest level. The sound of gunfire erupted from upstairs as Rodriguez and Webb engaged the search party. Morrison grabbed the facility radio from one of the unconscious technicians and heard angry Russian voices coordinating the search. They had perhaps 10 minutes before reinforcements arrived from other parts of the complex. "Chen, download everything you can from these computers. We need to get this intelligence back to command, assuming we survive the next hour." Morrison studied the facility map more carefully, plotting their route to the detention block. "There's a service tunnel that connects this room to the lower levels. We can reach the prisoners without going back upstairs into that firefight." As Chen worked frantically to copy the computer files, Morrison noticed something strange on the security monitor feeds. The cameras showed not just the interior of the facility, but also external views of the surrounding area. Despite the blizzard, he could make out movement in the snow about half a mile from their position. Someone was approaching the facility on foot, moving with purpose through the deadly storm. "Sir, you need to see this," Chen said urgently, pointing to another computer screen. "According to these files, there's only one American prisoner currently being held here, a CIA operative who was captured 3 weeks ago during a deep reconnaissance mission. But here's the strange part. The Russians think she's already dead. They reported her death to their superiors yesterday. Morrison felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Siberian cold. A female CIA operative who was supposed to be dead but was still being held prisoner. The pieces of a much larger puzzle were beginning to fall into place. This wasn't just about intercepting communications or gathering intelligence. Someone wanted this operative to disappear without a trace, and the Russians were being used as unwitting accomplices. The gunfire upstairs intensified, and Morrison could hear Rodriguez shouting orders to Webb over the tactical radio. They were running low on ammunition and taking heavy fire from multiple directions. The service tunnel to the detention block was their only option now, but Morrison couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking deeper into a trap with each step they took. Chen finished downloading the computer files and destroyed the hard drives to prevent the Russians from simply restoring their operation once his team was gone. As they prepared to enter the service tunnel, Morrison took one last look at the security monitors. The figure approaching through the blizzard was closer now, and despite the poor visibility, something about their movement pattern struck him as familiar. Whoever that is out there, Morrison muttered to Chen as they opened the tunnel access hatch. They're not Russian. That's military training. Probably special forces. The question is, are they here to help us or kill us? The service tunnel was a nightmare of twisted metal pipes and electrical cables, barely wide enough for a man to crawl through. Morrison and Chen moved through the cramped space like ghosts, following the facility map toward the detention block 3 levels below. Behind them, the sound of gunfire continued as Rodriguez and Webb fought to hold their position against overwhelming odds. The tunnel opened into a maintenance room filled with heating equipment and water pipes. Morrison checked his watch and realized they had been underground for over an hour. By now, Russian reinforcements would have arrived at the facility, and his team upstairs was probably completely surrounded. Their only hope was to rescue the CIA operative and find an alternate escape route through one of the facility's emergency tunnels. Chen pointed to a steel ladder that led down to the detention level. According to the map, the American prisoner is being held in cell block C, about 50 meters from the base of this ladder. But sir, the whole level is monitored by security cameras and motion detectors. Morrison nodded grimly. We'll have to move fast and hope the guards are too busy dealing with the situation upstairs to pay attention to the detention block monitors. He checked his rifle and prepared to descend the ladder. Remember, we get the prisoner and get out. We can't afford to get bogged down in a firefight down here. The detention level was surprisingly clean and well lit, with polished concrete floors and modern security equipment. This wasn't a temporary holding facility. It was designed for long-term interrogation and imprisonment. Morrison and Chen moved carefully down the main corridor, checking each cell as they passed. Most were empty, but signs of recent occupation were everywhere. Cell Block C was at the far end of the level, protected by an electronic lock and motion sensors. Chen worked quickly to disable the security system, while Morrison kept watch for guards. As the cell door clicked open, Morrison was prepared for almost anything except what he actually found inside. The woman sitting on the narrow cot looked up at them with eyes that held no surprise, only resignation. She was obviously American, probably in her 30s, with short dark hair and the kind of physical conditioning that suggested extensive military training. But what shocked Morrison was her calm demeanor, and the fact that her restraints had been cut from the inside. "You're the SEAL team that landed 3 days ago," she said quietly, standing up and stretching muscles that had clearly been preparing for action. "I heard the commotion upstairs and figured someone would eventually make it down here." She picked up a makeshift weapon she had fashioned from a metal bed frame. "I'm Sarah Chen, CIA Special Activities Division. And before you ask, yes, I've been waiting for the right moment to make my own escape." Morrison stared at her in disbelief. "You've been planning to escape? Why didn't you try before now?" Sarah smiled grimly and pointed toward the ceiling where Morrison could now see carefully concealed surveillance equipment. "Because I needed them to think I was helpless and broken. I've been gathering intelligence on this entire operation for 3 weeks. This facility is just one node in a network that spans across Eastern Europe and Central Asia. The Russians think they're running an independent intelligence gathering operation, but they're actually being used by a rogue faction within our own intelligence community." Chen looked confused. "A rogue faction? You mean Americans are behind this?" Before Sarah could answer, alarm klaxons began blaring throughout the facility. Emergency lighting bathed the detention level in an eerie red glow, as automated systems began sealing blast doors and activating additional security measures. Over the facility's intercom system, a voice spoke in accented English. "American soldiers, you are completely surrounded. Surrender now and your deaths will be quick. Continue to resist and we will make you suffer before we kill you." Sarah grabbed Morrison's arm urgently. "They're about to implement what they call the final protocol. This entire facility is wired to self-destruct if their operation is compromised. We have maybe 20 minutes before they blow this place to cover their tracks and eliminate all witnesses." Morrison felt the walls closing in around them. His team was trapped upstairs. The facility was about to explode, and they were 3 levels underground with no clear escape route. But Sarah's next words gave him hope. "There's something else you need to know," she said, leading them toward a hidden panel in the wall. "That person approaching through the blizzard that you saw on the security monitors, that's my extraction team. I managed to get a signal out 2 days ago using equipment I stole from the guards. Help is coming. But we need to get to the surface and link up with them before this place becomes our tomb." Sarah led Morrison and Chen through the hidden panel into what appeared to be an emergency escape tunnel that wasn't marked on any of the facility maps they had studied. The tunnel was narrow but well maintained, with emergency lighting that activated automatically as they moved through it. "This tunnel leads directly to the surface about 200 meters from the main facility," Sarah explained as they half ran through the confined space. "The Russians don't know about it because it was built by the previous occupants of this site. This place has been used for covert operations by at least 3 different intelligence agencies over the past decade." Morrison pressed his tactical radio trying to reach Rodriguez and Webb, but got only static. The thick concrete and metal of the facility was blocking all communications. "How do we know your extraction team will be able to find us in this blizzard?" he asked Sarah. "Because my partner has been tracking this operation for months," she replied. "We suspected there was a leak in our intelligence network, and this mission was designed to identify the source. What we found was much worse than a simple leak. There's an entire shadow network using legitimate intelligence facilities to conduct unauthorized operations." Chen was studying the tunnel walls as they moved. "These construction techniques and materials are definitely not Russian. This tunnel was built by Americans, probably within the last 5 years." He paused at a junction where the tunnel branched in 2 directions. "Which way?" Sarah pointed to the left branch without hesitation. "That leads to the surface. The right branch connects to the facility's main power plant, which is where they'll trigger the self-destruct sequence." She checked her watch. "We have maybe 15 minutes before they blow the charges." As they climbed toward the surface, Morrison could hear the muffled sound of explosions from behind them. The Russians were systematically destroying evidence throughout the facility, preparing for the final detonation that would eliminate all traces of their operation. He thought about Rodriguez and Webb trapped somewhere in that maze of concrete and steel, and felt sick with guilt for leaving them behind. The tunnel exit was concealed beneath a camouflaged hatch that opened onto a small depression in the snow-covered landscape. As they emerged into the howling blizzard, Morrison could barely see 10 feet in any direction. The wind was so strong it nearly knocked him over, and the cold hit his exposed skin like needles. Sarah immediately activated a small electronic device that sent out a pulsing signal. Within moments, a figure materialized from the swirling snow, moving toward them with the fluid grace of a trained soldier. Morrison raised his weapon instinctively, but Sarah waved him down. "That's my partner," she shouted over the wind. "Marine Corps sniper, 3 tours in Afghanistan, and the best shot I've ever seen." The approaching figure resolved into a woman, tall and lean, carrying a customized sniper rifle and wearing Arctic camouflage that made her nearly invisible in the storm. She moved up to their position without making a sound, despite the treacherous terrain and brutal weather conditions. "Sarah," the sniper said simply, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. "Status report." "Facility is compromised and set to blow in 10 minutes, Sarah replied quickly. "We have at least 2 American soldiers still trapped inside, plus valuable intelligence about a shadow network operating within our own intelligence community." The sniper studied the facility visible through the blizzard, her trained eyes assessing tactical possibilities that Morrison couldn't even see. "I've been watching this place for 6 hours. The Russians have 47 personnel on site, plus whatever prisoners they're holding. If we're going back in there, we need to move fast." Morrison felt a surge of hope. "You're willing to help us extract my men?" The sniper looked at him with eyes that had seen too much combat and too much death. "Nobody gets left behind, sailor. That's not just a motto, it's a promise." She shouldered her rifle and checked her equipment. "But we do this my way, and we do it fast. Once that facility blows, anyone still inside is gone forever." As if summoned by her words, a massive explosion shook the ground beneath their feet. Through the blizzard, they could see flames erupting from one section of the facility as the Russians began their systematic destruction of the evidence. Morrison realized with growing horror that Rodriguez and Webb might already be dead, victims of an operation that had spiraled completely out of control. The sniper, who introduced herself only as Ghost, took command of the rescue operation with the kind of quiet authority that comes from years of life and death situations. She had Morrison and Chen provide detailed intelligence about the facility, lay out while Sarah worked to establish communication with any surviving American personnel inside. "Your men are still alive," Ghost announced after studying the building through her scope. "I can see muzzle flashes from the second floor, northeast corner. They're pinned down but still fighting." She pointed to a section of the facility that hadn't yet been destroyed. "The Russians are herding them toward the main charges, probably planning to make their deaths look like casualties of the explosion." Morrison felt a surge of relief mixed with determination. "How do we get them out?" Ghost was already moving, her rifle trained on the facility as she planned their assault. "Sarah, you and the Navy guy circle around to the south entrance. Create a diversion, but don't get yourselves killed. Chen, you're with me. We're going through the main entrance and straight up to where your teammates are trapped." As they moved through the blizzard toward the facility, Morrison couldn't help but marvel at Ghost's calm professionalism. She moved through the storm like she was born to it, finding cover where none seemed to exist and identifying enemy positions that were invisible to everyone else. This wasn't just training. This was a level of combat expertise that came from surviving in the world's most dangerous places. The sound of gunfire intensified as they approached the building. Ghost held up her hand, signaling for everyone to stop, then pointed to the roof where Morrison could now see a Russian sniper positioned to cover the main approaches to the facility. Without a word, Ghost raised her rifle and fired a single shot. The enemy sniper disappeared from view. "Two guards at the south entrance," she whispered into her radio. "Sarah, you're clear to move." The diversion worked perfectly, as Sarah and Morrison drew the attention of the Russian forces toward the south side of the building. Ghost and Chen slipped through the main entrance and began their ascent to the second floor. The facility was filled with smoke and the acrid smell of burning electronics as the Russians systematically destroyed their equipment. Morrison and Sarah fought their way through the ground floor, taking out guards and creating as much noise and confusion as possible. The Russians were clearly unprepared for an attack from multiple directions, and their response was disorganized and panicked. On the second floor, Ghost moved like a deadly shadow, eliminating sentries with silent efficiency, while Chen followed behind, marveling at her ability to navigate the smoke-filled corridors without making a sound. They found Rodriguez and Webb barricaded in what had been the facility's communication center, surrounded by dead Russians and running dangerously low on ammunition. "Never been so happy to see friendly faces," Rodriguez gasped as Ghost and Chen burst through the door. Webb was wounded but mobile, and both men were exhausted from hours of constant fighting. "We need to move now," Ghost said, checking her watch. "The main charges will detonate in 3 minutes, and I don't think we can get clear of the blast radius in time through conventional means." Chen looked confused. "What do you mean, conventional means?" Ghost smiled grimly and pointed toward a window that faced away from the facility's main structures. "We're going out that window and down the side of the building. Sarah has extraction gear positioned at the base of the north wall." What followed was the longest 3 minutes of Morrison's life. Using ropes and climbing gear that Sarah had somehow positioned during their assault, the team rappelled down the exterior wall of the facility, while explosions began erupting throughout the building. Ghost provided cover fire from above, picking off Russian guards who tried to stop their escape. They hit the ground with seconds to spare, diving into a depression in the snow just as the main charges detonated. The explosion was tremendous, sending debris flying in all directions and creating a mushroom cloud that was visible even through the blizzard. When the smoke cleared, the facility was gone, reduced to a smoking crater in the frozen landscape. As they regrouped and treated Webb's wounds, Morrison realized that they had accomplished far more than a simple rescue mission. Sarah's intelligence about the Shadow Network would lead to the exposure of a major security breach within American intelligence operations. The computer files Chen had downloaded would help identify and neutralize other compromised facilities. Ghost stood watch while the others prepared for extraction, her rifle ready and her eyes constantly scanning the horizon. When Morrison asked her how she and Sarah had managed to coordinate such an effective rescue operation, she simply smiled and said, "We've been hunting these people for a long time. Tonight we finally caught them." The rescue helicopter appeared through the blizzard exactly when Sarah said it would, guided by GPS coordinates and extraction signals that had been planned long before Morrison's team ever set foot in Siberia. As they lifted off from the frozen wasteland, Morrison looked back at the smoking remains of the facility and realized that some missions succeed not because of careful planning, but because of the courage and skill of people willing to risk everything to ensure that no one gets left behind in the cold.